Hi, Group 37. Back at it. This should be fun. Uh, a few years back, I created this session in Burkina Faso, and I didn't know what to call it. So an APCD came up with the idea of calling it Tombola. The way it played out originally, we'd have a little hat, we would pull topics out of the hat, and we would go over those topics. Over time, these sort of became the 5 or 6 topics that people were most interested in, and we just sort of kept the name Tombola anyway. We'll go over graduate school, we'll talk about PC fellows, I'll give you some fellowship ideas to be looking at. We'll also talk about extensions, and I'll take you through just a little bit of, I guess, hard-earned advice over time. Don't forget though, I am actually right there, at that nice little beach resort below that'll always be in the corner. Apologies as we go through this, there might be some hiccups with me figuring out how to navigate all of this. So first off, extensions. I hope you are all at least considering it at this point. There's no reason to close the door until the last possible moment, so you might as well think about it. As far as process, in general, we look to volunteers to guide us as to what their interests are for extensions. We'll hand out, or ask you if you want, copies of the extension application. They're available now. There is no harm in filling anything out now. You're not committing to anything. You're just telling us that you might have a potential interest. The earlier we know that, the better, because oftentimes, especially if you're planning on changing sites, there's a long lead time to the extension process. I know I've already had conversations with 1 or 2 of you, so I'm happy that some of you are thinking about it. And honestly, I hope almost all of you are. I understand that most of you need to get on with life, but if we could keep you around, I'd be happy to have you. The time frame is deliberately very long, because given our day in, day out priorities, we don't often, well, frankly, it doesn't always get the immediate attention that we need. So we will ask you to start thinking about it now, and the absolute drop deadline is November 30th. Practically, you don't want to come to us November 28th, that's the Friday after Thanksgiving, and say, hey, I'm going to extend, I haven't mentioned it to you at all before. By the time late November comes around, you want to know what you want to do. And just an opinion from experience, I often see volunteers decide they want to extend because their first 2 years were phenomenal, so they're going to completely up and leave everything that they liked about their site, go to an NGO in the capital, and try to save the world. I've rarely seen that work. I fully support extensions, but I think extending with an organization that you already know, even if it's not your host org, or extending at site, tend to be much more fruitful than trying to extend to the capital or regional capital to an organization that you don't have much background with. Oftentimes volunteers who do that find that they're essentially glorified interns. The host organization doesn't necessarily know what to do with them, and it's sort of starting the process of those first couple of months at site again that were, let's be honest, a little frustrating. If you have any questions about extensions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Feel free to talk to Carolina this week. The more you talk to us, the earlier you talk to us, the smoother things go. And for those of you that are considering reasons to extend, I put this photo montage together last year, so the bottom photo of America isn't quite as accurate. It just so happened that the last group was right around the government shutdown. That's not an issue now, but I think the other photos still hold together nicely. So I think we talked you into it. And if you're extending, you'll want to see Carolina for a paper copy of the form. Again, the deadline on the form should be November 30th, 2014. But honestly, by then, we really should have an idea of what you're doing. And practically, that deadline's self-imposed. We could make it a little bit longer if you're not sure and you need some more time. The drop deadline would be your COS conference. And another form should go around. We're starting to think about Group 41, and we would like to get your feel for your site as a possible replacement. We'll ask you to fill out a copy of the site replacement questionnaire. I do want to be clear that we take your opinions extremely seriously when we gauge out potential replacements. However, it's not the only criteria that we have. Oftentimes we think that it might just, how to phrase it right. Volunteers have this charming idea that, gosh, my site's great, but there should be a volunteer from another sector. Education always thinks they need health or small business. Health always thinks they need education. I've seen that play out again and again. I've also benefited from having a longer time frame with a lot of sites. I'd see volunteers believe that they were just God's gift to the site and they were irreplaceable. However, I've seen that site be replaced and I've seen it work really well. All this is to say, we take your opinions seriously. Fill out the questionnaire, help us understand what you see in your site. But do know that the final decision is the discretion of the APCD, and Carolina may reach out to you for more information. Thanks. So, shifting topics. Graduate school. This used to be a conversation that we would have at COS conference. In fact, when I served, it was extremely rare for anyone to jump right from service into graduate school. It's become increasingly common. Happily, the tools are more readily available, and it's easier for you to make these decisions during service. For most of you, I'm sure you're well versed in looking up schools on websites, etc. However, I'd caution that those accelerated timeframes don't necessarily help you. I've seen a lot of volunteers jump into graduate school immediately because that's what the next step is supposed to be. And they don't necessarily know what they want to do with their lives yet. It's, let's just say grad school's a pretty expensive commitment to make unless you're certain. So a few points about graduate school. If you are planning on doing international work, a graduate degree is becoming a minimum expectation. However, it's not exactly clear what that degree is. There's no, most international jobs require advanced credentials, but they don't differentiate between, say, economics, MBA, JD, MPH, public health, lawyer, business administration. My last boss, prior to Gilbert, actually had a PhD in botany. So, you want to be honest with yourself about your goals. Excuse me. Are you skills building, or are you just trying to grab that piece of paper? Because if you're trying to grab a piece of paper, I can put you in the direction of a bunch of schools with 9 to 12 month programs and things like international affairs, international studies. But you're not going to come out of that program with any kind of special skills that help you build a career. Furthermore, you want to look at building skills, not validating what you're currently interested in. That international affairs degree, hey, it might be a lot of fun. You might be reading a lot of books you wanted to read anyway. You might be writing papers on topics that interest you. But are you going to come out of that after a year and a half, 2 years, with the skills that you need for the job that you're looking for? The narrative on this has changed in the past few years, and quite honestly, for the better. The narrative used to be follow your passion. and don't worry about the job. And now the narrative is to do a little bit more advanced research and make sure that you find a job that you want and then build the skills to match that job. To those ends, if you're interested in working abroad, you really want to consider some sort of hard technical skills, not just soft skills. As a minimum, you want to take a few management classes. Unfortunately, most positions abroad involve supervising others who do. You're no longer in the position where you're front and center in the field. More likely you're in a job like mine, where you sit behind a desk all day and you coordinate others who do the field work. It's, what's the right word? It's not nearly as sexy, not nearly as romantic. In some respects, 15 years after my Peace Corps service, I'm still trying to chase down that again. But it's the reality. I am a lot better off in my job, not because I have a master's in economics, not because I have a master's in development studies, but because I took a few management classes. Those have helped me immensely. I would push you towards hard skills, quantitative, monitoring and evaluation, trying to sort of guess what the next 5 to 10 years for international work will bring. It's moving a bit more away from technical because you can often find qualified in-country technical. Caroline is great. Valdo is a TEFL savant. You don't need to hire an American with those technical skills. Management, receipt and use of US dollars, distribution of US funds, those are skills that will always probably be held by Americans. Consequently, those are valuable skill sets. A class or two in finance, it'll serve you well. I'm going to jump back. There's one thing I forgot. My graduate program was initially development studies. I served with a group of people who were just as smart as me, just as motivated and skilled as me, but their piece of paper, that development studies degree, barely got them in the door in Washington. I personally was able to differentiate myself because I took a second master's degree, economics. Now, this isn't to say take 2 degrees. It's just to say think about who you're competing against. And there are tons of people who just grab those development studies, international studies, etc. degrees. One thing you want to look for at your university, does it have a school dedicated to the field you're studying? Or is it just sort of a poo-poo platter degree? A lot of these international studies degrees are poo-poo platters. You grab a class from the management cohort, you grab another class over there from the math university. All these different colleges combine 1 or 2 classes to get a degree. If that's the degree that you're going after, odds are you aren't getting the solid education that you need, and you certainly aren't going to get a network that's going to help you get a job afterwards. If you're going to go with one of those soft skill degrees, international studies, etc., make sure you're getting it from a top tier university that has their own school dedicated to the field. If you're unsure, reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you look at a few tricks and navigate a little of that for you. Next up, I often get asked, should I get a master's or should I get my doctorate? In fact, most volunteers I know that sort of went undergrad Peace Corps always envisioned that they would immediately return and get their master's, and you know what, why not? Let's just jump right to that doctorate. A few caveats. First off, know your field. know what you want to do. Understand that the burden of a doctorate is much higher than the burden of a master's. You're going to lose 3 to 5 years. You're going to be doing research at really minimum wage, if not lower. And you may reach a point where more school doesn't automatically make you more marketable. If you want field positions, such as the one I have, a doctorate doesn't necessarily help. There's plenty of people with master's degrees who can do the job, and that additional skill set in a doctorate doesn't help me, or wouldn't help, with the day in and day out of the job. Doctorates tend to be very specialized, very research focused. There's also diminishing returns to additional education. My salary wouldn't be significantly higher if I went onward for my doctorate. However, my debt load would be a lot higher. I've had, I guess the one caveat to all of this is that oftentimes you can get your master's for free if you are willing to pursue your doctorate. I've had a few volunteers over the years who've used that as a loophole to get their master's for free and then walk away from their doctorate. It's underhanded. It's clever. I wouldn't recommend it, especially if you want to have any kind of future career in academia. And to be honest, the volunteers I know who did so out of frustration because their doctorate was so not what they thought. So do be sensitive and do a fair amount of research before you decide that you want to pursue that doctorate. Excuse me, gonna grab some water. Cheers. By the same token, I constantly see volunteers that are willing to commit 2 years and $150,000 to getting their MBA before they're willing to commit 2 hours and $10 to reading The Idiot's Guide to Your MBA. Do some simple research. Find out what public health really means before you jump into your MPH at a top-tier school. It's a really expensive commitment. And there's plenty of books out there that can give you a feel for it in just a couple hours. Plenty of phone calls, too. You want to talk to an MPH? Let me know. There's quite a few around. And if anyone's interested in economics, I'm your man. Talk to me. This comes up a little bit less in Namibia, but in West Africa, volunteers were closer to Europe, and oftentimes they would ask about pursuing school there, as opposed to the U.S. Long story short, it's a clever idea, but be careful, especially if you're going into academia. U.S. universities will respect U.S. credentials a lot more than European credentials, excepting those named schools. The Sorbonne, Oxford, Hogwarts. Did I sneak that in there? Yeah. Okay. European programs tend to have more of a classroom focus. You're not going to get that hands-on internship. Gosh, most volunteers I know now doing MBAs, it seems like they're jet-setting all around the world, working in every continent and every type of business. European schools, that tends to be reserved for mid-career professionals. If you're looking for just like the early entry MBA, etc., that won't happen. You'll also end up with a very different network. So if you're going to try to break into the US or to US institutions, European schools just aren't going to be as helpful. It's easy to get into European schools. It's really tough to get funding. By the same token, tuition's a lot lower, but you're living in euros. And you don't have the ability to crash on your parents' couch, unless your parents are in Paris. Programs tend to be shorter. Student body tends to be older, a lot of mid-career professionals. And you run the risk of social unrest, strikes, people complaining about books, etc. Walkouts happen a fair amount. A lot of the volunteers I've known who've gone the Europe route lost anywhere between a month and a semester because of school lockouts. So it's just something to be aware of. Over time, people have told me I'm very negative about Europe. I don't intend to be. I'm just trying to share what I know. Questions on that? No? CJ, are you awake? Thanks. Anyway, if you got questions on any of this, reach out to me. Thanks. Shifting. I often get asked a fun version of this question. I got into Indiana with a scholarship, but I also got into Harvard and I need to pay my own way. What should I do? Long story short, avoid debt is always my answer. If, for example, you want to work for the U.S. government, the U.S. government accredits universities. They aren't in the business of saying one degree is better than another. They're going to treat them the same. Your MBA from Indiana is as good as someone else's MBA from Harvard. Having said that, if you do the math and play it all out, well, look, really, really smart people go to Harvard. They're probably making smart decisions. So here's what it looks like. So imagine the theoretical. You don't have to pay any debt. You get a job immediately in both cases. Sorry, you don't have to pay any debt with Indiana. You get a job immediately in both cases, but you have to pay your debt out of Harvard. A $35,000 debt at about 3% interest would take you, give or take, 13 years to pay off. That's 13 years that you could have been saving for retirement. That $35,000 debt with interest becomes a $57,000 debt by the time you pay it off. That $57,000 prorated over the course of like a 35-year career and saved up and giving you basic interest would be about $176,000 by the time you retire. So what you're asking yourself when you're thinking in terms of future value is, should I go to Indiana for free because I can save $176,000 over the course of a career, or should I pay to go to Harvard? If I stop right there, it's pretty easy, isn't it? Here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. If you take that $176,000, divide it by 220 workdays in a year, times 35-year career, times 40 hours a week, you're basically saying, am I going to make 50 cents an hour more because I went to Harvard instead of Indiana? And given the network, given the education, given the opportunity that Harvard could provide, I think it's a very reasonable argument that you could make that additional 50 cents an hour from that top-level Ivy school as opposed to the state school. Now, ultimately, I went the other route. I went state school all the way, and I've been able to avoid debt. And it's a huge relief. If you try to get international jobs, especially federal government jobs, one of the first questions they're going to ask you is if you have any debt. Because they're not in the business of moving you abroad so that you can hide from your debt. I'm much more marketable, I'm much more flexible, I have much less stress because I don't have debt. It allows for a lot more flexibility in career choices. I can save for my kids' college right away, etc. Those are things I couldn't do if I was paying off significant student loans right now. By the same token, though, my ceiling's probably a little bit lower than, say, someone like Gilbert, who went to Harvard and Princeton. Maybe that's why I'm DPT and he's CD, or at least he was. At any rate, you can see it's a complicated, nuanced argument, and if you need to argue with your parents around it, you can see both sides. My advice is avoid debt, but my advice is to put together some smart talking points about future value if you're going to get that debt for yourself. Shifting again, just a few quick hits on common schools. So, if you're looking at an MBA, the top schools, and after this, I'll show you how to find the top schools. Top schools can run you 50 grand a year. 2-year degree, at least 100 grand. That's not counting books, that's not counting room and board, that's not counting the fact that something like Wharton is going to make you do 2 or 3 extended periods abroad, and you're going to have much higher costs. If you're looking top level MBA, I think you're going to come out about $200,000 in debt. Furthering that, no one's going to pay you to get your MBA because they all think that you're going to make a ton of money. Same thing with JD. My personal opinion is the most flexible degree anyone will pay you to study is economics. It's a convenient personal opinion, isn't it? We'll talk public health in a couple slides, so I'll hold off on that for now. Education. Top schools for education, names you recognize. Vanderbilt, Hopkins, Harvard, UTEP. Those run about $1,700 a credit. At the bottom end of the top 20, though, still great schools. You get huge cost savings, down to like $300 a credit. Same thing with your MBA. You can get your MBA at a state school for literally 1/10 of the cost of something like Wharton or Kellogg or Berkeley. Look into your state schools, because you might only end up on $25,000 in debt, if at all. Maybe you can live at home. Definitely worth checking those out. And again, after this, we'll go into a little bit of how to do that. Second, what are your top schools for NGO management? Gosh, I feel like I'm a commercial for Indiana at this point, but it's really just a coincidence. Indiana, Syracuse, Minnesota, Washington, state schools. If you're interested in NGOs, those are your tickets. Those tend to be relatively cheaper credits because they're state. If you're interested in international development, those tend to be relatively higher cost credits because they're higher level schools. Maybe not necessarily Ivy League, but they are the East Coast schools. They tend to be private. You run down the list and you see names like American, Brandeis, Duke, Hopkins, and Harvard. Point being, if you're looking for a job with an NGO, maybe you want that NGO management degree, which is going to cost a heck of a lot less than that international development, international affairs degree, where the top schools tend to be on East Coast and tend to have high tuition costs. Public health. Let me grab a drink. I'll be quick though. Thanks. So, I tend to describe public health this way. In the 80s, if you got a JD, a law degree, you could do anything. Didn't matter. In the 90s, if you got your MBA, you could do anything. Didn't matter. Public health is sort of the international version of that. Public health degrees are extremely well respected abroad, especially in Africa. That makes it a very fast growing field. There's lots of opportunities domestically and internationally. In fact, the most common degree for anyone in my position is an MPH. But what did I just tell you? Did I just try to sell you that degree? Sorry about that. Think about it this way. If the most common degree for my position is an MPH, and I can't be in my job for more than 5 years, doesn't that mean you're going to be competing with a ton of mid-career professionals with their MPH if you're going to go get your MPH? Maybe you want to be looking at the what's next degree and looking towards the future for your inspiration instead of looking to the past. This isn't to discourage the MPH, but it's to say be cautious, because you'll be a new entry into a field that has a lot of mid to late career professionals with the same credentials. So how are you going to differentiate yourself? That was a question. You should shout out ideas. I'll give you 30 seconds. God, this is awkward. That was probably 5 seconds. I can't do it any longer. Okay. First off, anyone my age or older completely missed out on the M&E revolution. When we were in graduate school, the philosophy was still spend the money, good will happen, therefore we just need proof that the money was spent. So most of our monitoring is around receipt and use of funds. We have very limited skills in strategic information management, in quantitative analysis, in any of the prove that we are doing good type scenarios. We don't manage big data well. We don't self-market very well. Those are all niche opportunities. Oh, social media. Despite the fact that I'm actually presenting this to you as a webcast. I think you see how stiff and uncomfortable I am with it. We don't market well. Those are all niche opportunities and skill sets that you should build if you want to compete with people in, say, their 40s. Now, how do you do that? Are you going to do that with your MPH? Maybe. But maybe your focus is going to be on epidemiology. Maybe your focus is going to be on quantitative analysis. Something that differentiates you from what people did 5 to 10 to 15 years ago. Happy to talk to you guys about it. Feel free to reach out to me, bounce ideas off me. I'm very opinionated, and I'd be happy to share those opinions. Sorry. I guess that sort of shifts us out of graduate school. Again, if you've got questions, feel free to ask. Fellows. PC Fellows is a complicated thing to talk about because it's so unique and diverse. It's a graduate fellowship program for RPCVs. It is done in direct collaboration with Peace Corps, and there's an office at headquarters that can assist. It's as simple as, I think, peacecorps.gov/fellows. After this point, meaning after your mid-service, you can feel free to reach out to them. Technically, they won't work with volunteers until their 18-month mark. Practically, plenty of volunteers have contacted them after mid-service. It's tough to talk about the program in detail because the universities that are eligible are constantly updating and the benefits are constantly changing. Long story short, in exchange for some kind of commitment, it might be work study, it might be mentoring undergraduate students, you receive reduced tuition. You are always eligible for fellows, assuming you complete your service. So it's not a benefit that you have to use within your first couple of years after you COS. Other fellowships. There's lots of fellowships that you don't... So, fellows is directly a result of being a volunteer. There's lots of other fellowships that aren't directly a result of being a volunteer and aren't associated with Peace Corps, but you're much more competitive for because you were a Peace Corps volunteer. The one I like to highlight, because it's the one I used, is Foreign Language and Area Studies. Think about it this way. September 10th, 2001. No one cared if people spoke Dari or Pashtun. After September 11th, those were very valuable skills. The U.S. government has an interest in maintaining a cohort of people who speak obscure languages. The government also has an interest in making sure that educated elites from other countries have the opportunity to study in the U.S. FLAS is the marriage of those two interests. So you, as an American, can study an obscure language taught by a foreign national, almost like an LCF, in a university environment while you're concurrently getting your advanced degree. I personally was a 2-time FLAS fellow studying Sudanese Arabic while I was earning my degree in international development and economics. I'll be honest, I probably don't have much better than a tourist's understanding of Sudanese Arabic today, but I got those 2 advanced degrees. FLAS is a great program. 0 tuition plus living stipend. I literally got paid to go to graduate school. Unfortunately, you can't go to like flas.gov and find a list of all eligible schools, because schools apply uniquely to the Department of Education. I was going to say Minister of Education. But each school submits their own application. It changes year in, year out. Languages change year in, year out. Programs change year in, year out. What you basically want to do is find the program that you're interested in. Say maybe you want to get your MBA at George Washington. Great. Then Google FLAS George Washington and see if they have any opportunities. And I'll tell you what, the only reason I got these fellowships, I took my LPIs. I learned local language. I could prove that I could learn obscure languages. My LCFs were my best recommenders. So take local language seriously now, because it could quite literally pay off for you later on. Next up, Fulbrights. I guess the guidance here is really a Fulbright is not a Fulbright is not a Fulbright. There's lots of different kinds of Fulbrights, and practically speaking, you're probably targeting a student Fulbright. Professional Fulbrights tend to be like late career lawyers, helping out to redesign the judicial system in Namibia. That's actually someone here right now. The teacher grants might be an opportunity if you have a special skill. For example, Crystal, you're doing classroom English teaching. Maybe a teacher grant for a Fulbright TEFL teacher. That might be feasible. Scholar grants. Those are possible but unlikely. The student grants are probably the most attractive. Student grants are things like, I want to study djembe drumming in Ghana, or I want to study the process of Tuareg silver making in Niger. A little secret about a Fulbright: you apply to the country. Consequently, you can be one of 10,000 people trying to get a Fulbright in Italy, but you might be the only one in the world looking at Burkina Faso, and they're going to dust off the Fulbright committee just to review your application. It is a lot easier to get a Fulbright to an obscure country than it is to get one to, say, Western Europe, South America, etc. Boren fellowships. Boren are a bit like Fulbrights, except it's research that is instrumental to the safety and security of the U.S. Unless that sounds too much like I'm building a rocket and pointing it at, I don't know, who's our enemy today? Syria? Russia? It really doesn't work that way. Oftentimes it's working with disadvantaged populations in India, because they may subsequently become a disaffected generation that releases some of their angst on the U.S. It can be pretty expansive. You tend to be a bit more attractive candidate because you already have a lot of international experience, and they tend to respect Peace Corps as organizations that are like their own go-getters, self-starters. And finally, PMFs. PMFs are fellowships after graduate school. It's designed to fast-track individuals into middle management in the U.S. government. I don't know if it ends up being past tense. I am a PMF, I guess. So it works this way. The summer of your first year of graduate school, you apply to the PMF program. The first hoops you jump through are at your university, which is sort of funny, because quite literally, no one had ever done PMF from Ohio University, so I created my own hoops. I made them very big hoops that were very easy for me to jump through. It was like, Dan, fill out an essay. Check. Now, if you're going to a school like Harvard, you're probably competing with 50 to 100 of the brightest minds in the country going through graduate school at the time. Doesn't matter. I got the same piece of paper they did that says I'm a PMF. After that university level interview, you go to an interview at a regional site like Chicago, San Francisco, Miami, and you do a bit of play acting. It's almost like the Foreign Service exam. In fact, it's very much like the Foreign Service exam. You have a pile of paper like this put in front of you, and you've got to put together a speech in 15 minutes. You and a group of other people are sitting around a table trying to negotiate which grants get funded even though you don't have enough money. It's a day of little activities like that. You pass that, you get your PMF stamp. And that makes you a very attractive candidate for any kind of federal jobs, with some exceptions. Most overseas positions don't recognize PMF. But it doesn't mean that you can't, like, say, get your foot in the door working stateside for USAID and then jump to PMF later on. Jump abroad later on with your PMF. I'll bring this up again at COS, and we'll also talk a lot about federal jobs at COS, so don't worry about those things too much right now. And something that I just like to drill on as much as I can. Save money now, you won't even miss it, and it'll make a big difference for you later on. If you're planning on working abroad, you're going to have a very asymmetrical career as far as earnings go. And your life is going to be a lot easier if you save money early. Look, you don't really get into this field to make a ton of money. So the more you save early on, the easier your career choices can become abroad later on. Excuse me 1 second. Letters of reference. Yes, I'm happy to be a recommender for any of you. And honestly, over the years, I've built up quite a, quite a file of letters. I've probably written about 800 recommendation letters. I have my suspicions that certain schools just have their own file for me. Like another one from Dan. To those ends, here's what I've learned. Much better communicate it in advance. Be realistic about what a burden this is. A unique letter for a graduate school. Those tend to be online, they tend to be essay-based, and they tend to be questions that you can't anticipate. Those tend to be about an hour to an hour and a half each. If you're applying to 8 graduate schools, I just lost a day doing nothing but filling out your graduate school recs. More time than you can give us, the better. The burden of detail is really on you. I know you. I can provide some personal details. I actually know a fair number of the schools that you're going to be looking at, and I can tailor what I know of your characteristics to what those schools are interested in. Just as an example, if you want an MBA out of Michigan, they're much more interested in building CEOs and people who can work through existing systems. They want guys that are by the book. If you want an MBA at Berkeley, they're much more interested in innovators. The types of people who can look at a problem and think of what the solution might be. If I fill out the wrong skills for the wrong program, you're not getting in. It's that simple. So, we can provide a fair amount of detail based on what we know of you and our interactions with you. We cannot provide a fair amount of detail about your site. A recommendation letter tends to come in 3 parts. First part is background on us, how I know you, what Peace Corps does, how long we've worked together, and in what role. I can do that. Second part tends to be your role in the organization, what you did in your community, your day in, day out, your jobs, your biggest accomplishments. I can't do that. Carolina can't do that. Carolina probably could. But the things that you're most proud of, we're not always sure. Aligning them to that university, we're even less sure. And I'll give you a little hint on how to do that in a minute. Long story short, that part has to come from you. We'll ask you to write a paragraph or so about your community and about your biggest accomplishments. And then the third part of that letter tends to be characteristic specific. Your biggest skills, your weaknesses, and we got to give the weaknesses. Otherwise they'll worry about some perceived weaknesses that are much worse than your weaknesses actually are. And what we know of your capacity for graduate study and your passion for the topic. We can provide a lot of that. You don't need to worry about that. But if we don't get those site-based details from you, we can't provide a personal enough letter, and it's really to your detriment. And don't be modest. Say big things about yourself, and we can update it accordingly. Letters of rec for graduate school. Long lead times. Months, typically. If you give me a rec a couple days beforehand, I know how I'm answering, and it's not going to be good. For jobs, it tends to be different. By the time they're talking to us, they're probably already interested in hiring you. So we'll provide very quick turnarounds. Jobs are often by the phone, too, making it a little bit easier. You should reach out to me in advance if it's a job-related rec, just so I know and I can be prepared to give it a quick turnaround. And by the way, I've gotten pretty good at those, too. Oftentimes, if the interviewer says, "Is there anything else I need to know?" I'll be like, "Yes, you're not the first organization that's called me in the past few days. This candidate seems to be popular with another organization that wants to hire them too, so you may want to act quickly." You're welcome. And finally, so how do you know what to put into those letters? And how do you know what graduate schools to research, what programs? At the risk of bombing, we're going to go live and try to do this. I'm going to take you to U.S. News & World Report rankings and reviews for graduate schools. There's a few tricks that I've picked up over time, and I'd like to show them to you. So, you have this huge clearinghouse for best graduate schools at U.S. News. Sorry about the URL, just Google it, or you've got it in the PowerPoint too. I want to take you through a scenario that I had a couple years ago, where a volunteer was applying to Boston University Engineering. Here's what we found out. So BU Engineering School, we were trying to tailor a letter. And lo and behold, engineers can also lend their skills to humanitarian causes through the school's chapter of Engineers Without Borders, which works on projects locally and internationally. There's a summer design program that encourages students to explore engineering, and Fellows, which pairs graduate engineering students with teachers in area grade schools and high school. Now, this particular volunteer was working in rural Kavango in a school that didn't have electricity and had to find some workaround alternatives. He was a teacher. What a perfect way to tailor his letter. So right here, in the engineering school overview for Boston University, you see that they have Engineers Without Borders, that they work with middle school students on unique activities, and that they pair engineering students with teachers in area grade schools. Now tell me you can't put together a good rec letter with that type of information, knowing that this volunteer was a Kavango-based school teacher. Now great. I just put that all together. I implied to you that it's something that we do and can do, but the reality is, that's the type of thing that you should be looking into first, because you can't assume that we have enough time to do that. So check out your program, see where they rank, see what the tuition is, see what that narrative says about any extracurriculars, any focus areas out of that school. And you can not game the system, but you can find a really good match for your skills and interest in what schools have. If you have any questions on that, if you want my help in researching certain graduate programs, if you want me to point you in a few directions, feel free to reach out to me. If you want to talk about I'm not sure exactly what I want to do, but X, Y, and Z interests me, what field makes sense, feel free to reach out to me. Oh, one other thing's on letters of reference. Everyone always wants to use the Americans. Don't. Use your host country supervisor. The best rec letters I have ever seen came from non-native English speakers. No one's judging, they are judging you based on the English in the letter, if that makes sense. I've seen these great letters from rural counterparts in Burkina Faso and Namibia, where they say, look, I'm sorry my English is not perfect, but I simply had to write in promotion of Jennifer because she was such an amazing volunteer and had such a profound impact on my life. In some respects, not to belittle our relationships at all, but it's a bit like a factory. I've worked with about 1,000 volunteers now. I can provide personal characteristics, I can provide big words in the letter. I can't necessarily provide passion. I don't see you day in, day out. Your rural counterparts, the people who've worked with you since your arrival at site, they can write really good letters and things that resonate. If you've got a review official at the university and they're going through 1,000 letters, I guarantee you 950 of them look like the letters that I'm going to write, which might not be a good thing. And only 5 or 10 of them will look like the letters that your counterparts will write. If you want to stand out, that's the way to do it. Letter from rural Namibia. Don't be afraid of rec letters. Take them very seriously. And tailor them to the school. And I'll tell you what, I'll be really quick with your rec letters when you're still a volunteer. But I've gone through a lot of cycles now. Having been in the field for 6 years now, my first generation of volunteers have actually finished graduate school, got their starter job after graduate school, and then jumped to their career track position. They tend to want to keep using me as a recommender. I get a little bit slower if I never hear from you, except for when you want a letter of recommendation. I said earlier I must have done 800 letters. That's probably for about 300 people. I think only 15, 20 of them keep in routine contact with me. Maybe 50 of them provide follow-up saying, hey, I got the job, thank you, really appreciate it. I personally write my recommenders every couple of years, even if they haven't done anything for me in 15 years, just to let them know how important they were to my career progression and where I am now. I would encourage you to do the same type of thing. It's a really big burden to do these letters. It takes a lot more time than you anticipate to do them well. And if I don't hear back from you, I just get a little bit slower, and I use a few less superlatives the next time around. Keep your recommenders happy, because you're going to need them. I guess we already talked about this, so I don't need to go through it in any kind of detail. This is really something that's more COS conference, so I won't get into it now. Long story short, most overseas jobs are actually office jobs that are overseas. Don't think that you're going to be recreating your Peace Corps experience by being abroad as a Foreign Service officer, someone in my position, or with USAID. Also be savvy. There's lots of lots of federal agencies that place people abroad. And there's lots of agencies that are small enough where, like, they can't hoard talent. They'll put you to work right away. Don't just think in terms of USAID, state. Think in terms of smaller organizations. ADF, African Development Foundation. Great agency, my first agency. USTDA, Trade Development Authority. Tiny, tiny little organizations that are out there. And looks like that's it. Again, Group 37, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. I feel badly. I missed your reconnect too. But how about this? I promise to be at your COS. And feel free to call me at any time if you want to talk about anything from this session. Alright, enjoy the rest of your mid-service. And I'll see you guys at COS. Hopefully you're all there. No, you better all be there. Bye-bye.